Hello and welcome back. We will cover several chapters today, 3rd Nephi 21 through 26. These chapters are comparatively short, but they introduce the possibility of discussing some interesting topics. For example, if Christ is visiting the people in the Americas in person, why does he quote the scriptures? And also, what's the point of studying Isaiah? Do we study it to gain knowledge, or is there some other reason behind it? But before we start our discussion, I'll ask a trivia question which we will answer toward the end of the video. Which Old Testament prophet or prophets did Moroni quote when he first visited Joseph Smith? We'll answer that question at the end of the video. We'll start with 3rd Nephi 21 and 22. And if you're curious, the first 7 verses of this chapter, of chapter 21, combine to form the longest sentence in the Book of Mormon. The reason I find this fascinating is because it's a translated transcript of the Savior speaking to his people. As we learn elsewhere in the Scriptures, the Savior adapts his message to the listener. So I wonder for whose benefit he was talking this way in a huge 7-verse sentence full of parenthetical commentary. In those 7 verses, we find another instance where the Book of Mormon talks about itself. Here's a quick synopsis of what those 7 verses are saying. When these things which I declare unto you shall be made known unto the Gentiles, it shall be a sign unto them, that they may know that the work of the Father hath already commenced. Christ is saying that when his words reach the Gentiles, meaning when the Gentiles gain access to the Book of Mormon, it will be a sign that God's work among them has begun. Overall, to be honest, I had a hard time knowing what to do with the message of 3rd Nephi 20 through 22. From a high level, it's a summary of the restoration and gathering of God's chosen people, and it uses Old Testament-style figures of speech. But the fascinating thing about it, though, is that in these chapters, Christ weaves together verses from the Old Testament prophets Isaiah and Micah. He takes excerpts from both books and combines them to create a continuous narrative. And it's more than that. Ludlow has shown these chapters to form a chiastic pattern. As a quick reminder, a chiasm or chiasmus is a form of Hebrew poetry where several verses build to a climax and then repeat in reverse order. For example, A, B, C, D, C, B, A. Except in this case, over the course of the chapters, it builds slowly up to the letter N before working its way back. And I've included the text of that in the show notes. Now, picture being given that assignment to write a talk on the subject of the gathering of Israel, but you need to construct your talk from excerpts from Isaiah and Micah, and it needs to form a chiastic pattern, and it needs to all make sense. Oh, and just to make it more fun, the year is 1827, and the concept of chiasmus won't be known in the Western Hemisphere for at least another 100 years. But even if we ignore that no one in America had heard about chiasmi, I think is the plural, writing a coherent narrative by weaving the writings of Micah and Isaiah together is still a very demanding assignment. You would need to be an Old Testament scholar and a gifted writer to attempt such a thing. And why would you bother? Why would you bother to do it in the first place? That's an awful lot of effort to put into a fraudulent book, especially when you're working under an extremely tight deadline. The whole book was written in about 85 days. Now for chapter 23. Jesus commanded the people to diligently search Isaiah's words, and then he said there were other scriptures that he wanted them to have. We'll return to Isaiah in just a minute. He asked Nephi to bring the record that he had kept. He referenced the prophecy in Helaman 14:25 that at the time of the Savior's death, graves would open and saints would appear unto many. He asked Nephi, was it not so? Nephi confirmed that it was so. To which Jesus responded, how be it that ye have not written this thing? Nephi realized that he hadn't talked about saints rising from the grave, and so he updated his record. What confuses me about this, though, is that despite Nephi having updated his record, the account translated by Mormon contains no mention of saints rising from the grave. So perhaps the record translated by Mormon was not the one that Nephi was commanded to update. Or Mormon may have omitted that part while he was summarizing the destruction in the land of the Nephites, knowing that it was going to be covered here in 3rd Nephi. But for me, one of the main takeaways of that chapter and of that exchange between Nephi and the Savior is how important the contents of the Scriptures are to God. Jesus continued providing the Nephites with additional Scriptures. He next gave them Malachi's teachings. Chapter 24 addresses tithes and offerings. To me, the fact that the Savior gave the people Malachi chapters 3 and 4, as well as a largely unaltered version of the Sermon on the Mount, indicates that Christ intended for his church to be global rather than regional, and he wanted all its members to have access to a common curriculum. And that's why he cites his previous prophecies in the Old World rather than generating something de novo. This also tells me that the Nephites had access to scriptures. This is supported by various other scriptures all throughout the Book of Mormon. In fact, rewinding back to the book of 1 Nephi, Nephi was commanded to obtain the brass plates from Laban so that his posterity could be guided by their teachings, which would only work if at least some of them were literate. Jesus continued standardizing the Nephite curriculum, as we said, by giving them Malachi 4, which addresses the sealing power. While I was reading this, I found it really intriguing that the Book of Mormon contained answers to questions that would not be asked by Joseph Smith until several years later. It took several years after the Book of Mormon was translated for the revelations given to Joseph Smith recorded in the Doctrine and Covenants to be revealed. For example, the Book of Mormon discusses the sealing power in 3 Nephi 25, in Helaman 10, and also Moroni talked about it in his first visit to Joseph. But the sealing power was not given to Joseph until April 3rd, 1836. And another example, although tithing was discussed in 3 Nephi 24, it was not revealed as a church policy until July 8th, 1838, when Joseph asked how much church members should pay for tithing, and D&C 119 was given in response. If Joseph had authored the Book of Mormon and chosen to include Malachi 3 and 4, which explain tithing, why did he himself not realize their importance for another 5 or 10 years? And those are just two examples of a larger pattern that Joseph Smith did not seem terribly familiar with the contents of the Book of Mormon. Religious scholars have noted that Joseph Smith preferred to cite the Bible rather than the Book of Mormon in his sermons and teachings, and they can quickly provide statistics to back up that claim. Some anti-Mormon websites claim it is possible for highly gifted individuals to have the acumen needed to write books as large and complicated as the Book of Mormon. J.R.R. Tolkien, for example, constructed extraordinarily rich and complicated narratives, but he needed more than a decade of research and careful planning, and probably a mountain of notes or 3x5 cards. Timelines in the Book of Mormon are also complex, and they fold over one another. Yet, when the dates of the events were calculated and included in the 1888 edition of the Book of Mormon, you know, those estimated dates that it shows in the Book of Mormon, when those dates were added, they didn't conflict or contradict with each other. But going back to Tolkien, I doubt that he continued to find surprises in the books that he had written, or that he continued to discover new layers of meaning in his books that until then he had known nothing about, like Joseph Smith did. Now let's get back to Isaiah. A few chapters earlier, Christ commanded the Nephites to study Isaiah's words. But after doing this, he cut through all the mystery and he told the people what Isaiah's prophecies meant. 3 Nephi 23:6 said that he expounded all the scriptures unto them which they had received. Now 3 Nephi 26:3 is even more direct. And he did expound all things, even from the beginning, until the time that he should come in his glory, yea, even all things which should come upon the face of the earth, even until the elements should melt with fervent heat, and the earth should be wrapped as a scroll, and the heavens and the earth should pass away. So why would the Savior recommend a lifelong study of the words of Isaiah if he was about to reveal all things from the end to the beginning? If he had just revealed the whole gospel plan from the beginning in plain language, what were they supposed to get out of going back and studying Isaiah? This made me wonder if perhaps the reason for studying Isaiah isn't about gaining new knowledge. maybe we study Isaiah for the same reason that we sing hymns or that we listen to music. Maybe it's less about obtaining new information and more about allowing particular feelings to resonate. Sometimes when we sing hymns, we'll discover in the words of a song some new hidden gem of wisdom hiding there in plain sight, but that's the exception, not the norm. Singing, in my opinion, is more about the feelings that you experience than the knowledge that you gain. And maybe Isaiah's writings are similar. Christ told Emma in D&C 25:12, "My soul delighteth in the song of the heart." Nephi told us in 2 Nephi 25 that his soul delighteth in the words of Isaiah. So perhaps reading Isaiah is more about how it makes you feel. It might not contain the movie's script of God's eternal plan, but maybe it's the soundtrack. It might be that Nephi loved Isaiah because it allowed him to re-experience what he had felt while he was seeing his vision. Maybe the Nephites were commanded to search Isaiah's words as a way of letting them re-experience the feelings that they felt when Christ visited them. The notion of feelings sometimes being more important than information is reinforced by what happened next. In 3 Nephi 26, verse 14, "And it came to pass that he did teach and minister unto the children of the multitude of whom hath been spoken, and he did loose their tongues, and they did speak unto their fathers great and marvelous things, even greater than he had revealed unto the people. And he loosed their tongues that they could utter. Yea, even babes did open their mouths and utter marvelous things, and the things which they did utter were forbidden, that there should not any man write them." Perhaps by prohibiting them from writing down the incredible things their children were saying, Jesus was telling his people, words aren't the point right now. Your babies are prophesying. Just soak it in. Also, if the meaning of Isaiah's words were so important and Jesus had explained them, why didn't anyone write down the meaning? As it happened, someone did write it down. 3 Nephi 26:7 says, "The plates of Nephi do contain the more part of the things which he taught the people." And Mormon wanted to include all of it. Quote, "But the Lord forbade it, saying, I will try the faith of my people. And if it shall so be that they shall believe these things, then shall the greater things be made manifest unto them." Context implies that these things refers to the Book of Mormon rather than the teachings of Isaiah in particular. For me, all of this might suggest that much of the gospel is about enjoying, preserving, and reliving happy or sacred moments. And things that help us re-experience these feelings might include music, scriptures, time with loved ones, or even possibly the words of Isaiah. And maybe gospel doctrine classes and sacrament meeting talks are less about the information that we gain and more about what we feel and what we experience. All right, now we'll answer the trivia question. Which Old Testament prophet or prophets did Moroni quote when he first visited Joseph Smith? Well, he quoted several, and they're similar, although not exactly the same as the prophets quoted by the Savior when he visited the Nephites. Here's what Joseph said. He first quoted part of the 3rd chapter of Malachi, and he quoted also the 4th or last chapter of the same prophecy. So, as he had done with the Nephites, Christ quoted Malachi to Joseph Smith. Next, he says, he quoted the 11th chapter of Isaiah, saying that it was about to be fulfilled. He quoted also the 3rd chapter of Acts, 22nd, 23rd verses. And lastly, he quoted the 2nd chapter of Joel, from the 28th verse to the last. So he quoted Malachi and Isaiah similar to the Nephites, and also Joel from the Old Testament, and the book of Acts from the New Testament. And those particular scriptures all deal with the restoration of the last days, if you want to go back and read them. Click like, subscribe if you haven't, and be sure to join us next time as we wrap up the book of 3rd Nephi. And we will see you next time.